Yo, what up, fam? It's Maris with Critical Root Zone, where we dig deep with inquiring minds to get to the root of sustainability. Want to know why I started this podcast? My belief that a positive, sustainable climate is critical to me and you, and all that we love and enjoy about our planet. I want to learn more about the problems we face on a daily basis, and why they seem like we have no control over them, because I believe we do. My guests will range from all walks of life. And I want to hear from you. What do you think? What do you believe? Let's make a lasting and permanent change together. Please subscribe and join me as we get to the root of the problems here on CRZ. Welcome back to another episode of Critical Root Zone. I'm your host, Maris, the Maris Vibes, DJ Earthbird. And we have an amazing lineup for you guys. This is going to be a 3-part series that I'm calling Earth Angels. And the reason why I chose that title is because these humans are boots on the ground doing the most beautiful work. And it's not even work. It's this passionate intuition that is just evolving and growing outside of themselves. And I had the honor to meet them. So my very first guest I'm going to introduce to you is Haynes Motsinger. I have a personal connection with all of my guests, almost all of them. I don't know, maybe in the future I won't, and I'll have to just wing it because there's going to be celebrities coming on, right? There's going to be big timers coming on. This is a celebrity in my life. This is someone I am heavily influenced by, someone that I love, someone that encourages me and inspires me, and I can't wait for you to meet her. Haynes, welcome to my show.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Yay. This is our show, actually. This is our show. I want everyone to get a feel for who you are, and we're going to talk about that. But I met you where you work in Nashville, here in Nashville, Tennessee, the Nashville Food Project, which we were there for a meeting by the Tennessee Women in Green. So there's a couple organizations I'm shouting out right now that bring people together. And it's about sustainability. That's a buzzword. We talked about this. You wrote about this, that we're also going to kind of dive into, like, what does sustainability mean to you, to me? But you're the Chief Program Officer at the Nashville Food Project. That's an awesome title. Why don't we dig into what you do there, what it is, and yeah, you can talk about the mission if you would like.
Yeah, awesome. So the Nashville Food Project is a nonprofit organization here in Nashville that grows, cooks, and shares food as a way to cultivate community food security. So we believe that everyone deserves access to the foods that they want and need, and that they should be able to access those at any time. I came to this job about 1.5 years ago because food is my greatest passion in life. And the Nashville Food Project does food by cooking meals, recovering food waste, teaching people how to grow food using sustainable agricultural practices. And so it was like a dream job for me.
Yeah.
And as a chief program officer, what I do is help do the strategic design of all of our programs so that we can live into our mission to make our food system and our community food secure and just and sustainable. So,
oh, God. And that's the first topic, this Earth Angel series. The food part is like, it's so cool because the 3 topics are food, shelter, and water. We're starting with food. But the underlying mission or the alignment is community and loving each other. And that's part of my mission, right? In order to love the planet, we have to love each other.
That's
but
right.
It starts with you. We can't go out unless we go in. And then once we get in, we can spread it. And so what you do, and I know you so well, you are inspired, or you know that the work starts with people. And like you said, making sure it's just in a sustainable system. So how did you get into this type of work? How?
Yeah, so I've had a meandering journey, to be perfectly honest, but the through line has been food. Forever in my life. I grew up on a farm, then I went to college and started learning about farm worker rights. Then I worked on an organic farm, grew up around gardens. Like, my grandparents grew all of their food and like fed themselves through the winter.
Beautiful.
And food has just always been something in my life that brings me in relationship with other people and has helped me learn how I care about the world and care about others. And so I've just seen it as a tremendous opportunity to affect social change and making my community a better place by like feeding other people and growing food with other people and sharing our stories about food. I've just learned that it's tremendously transformational, and it's sort of how I see my role in like making a better future for all of us.
Yeah, you talked about the farm workers' rights, and I know that that's a big part of it. Tell me more about that. Tell our viewers a little more about that.
Yeah. So I grew up on a 200-acre farm in rural North Carolina, and starting in the early 90s, more and more migrant farm workers were coming to work in the fields, tobacco fields. I grew up right in the heart of like tobacco country in North Carolina, and my dad would actually lease our land to tobacco production. And over my childhood, I started seeing more and more people who didn't look like me showing up in the fields doing that work. And I didn't really think anything of it at the time. Fast forward till my senior year in college, I took an environmental justice class with an amazing woman named Flora Liu. And one of our case studies was about the economic, environmental, and social struggles that migrant farm workers face that come up to work seasonally in the United States, and how precarious their living conditions are, how they work so hard to feed us and grow the food that sustains us, and they have their wages stolen. They live in absolutely horrible conditions. They're disconnected from their families. And I thought, if this is how we're feeding ourselves, like, this is a real problem. And so it was sort of the doorway that opened the professional kind of pathway for me into food, was realizing like, I really care about people. I really love eating. And so this shouldn't be happening. So actually my first job in food was with a migrant rights organization that worked with like H2A guest workers, who are guest workers that work in food.
H2A? What does that stand for? Or
it's a federal guest worker program. So people get visas to come to the United States to work seasonally.
Wow.
Yeah. So a lot of H2A workers come up from Central and South America to work, in our agricultural fields.
That's amazing. The connection to food can be lost, right? You and I talked about this. Like, I didn't have the same experience as you growing up on a farm and having your family be so immersed in that world. I had a mother she was actually a chef. So we did cook pretty delicious and nutritious food. And she enjoyed that with me. And she taught me that. She taught me that what you eat matters. Because physically our bodies, that is an expression of what's going on up here. I know when I eat really crappy food, I feel like crap in my body and in my mind. I can't be as present as I want to. So how that relates, right? And then how you talked about community, knowing where your food comes from, sharing good food. This is all sustainability. And let's talk about that. Like the aspect of like, what is sustainability? We talk about food systems and how to get to the root of what's going on, because you hear, right? There's some not so great things happening to farmers. There's some not so great things happening to our food, So how does what you do or like your passion kind of like relate to the solution, like what you're doing? I know, yeah. I'll let you just handle that question. I won't talk anymore, actually. Your turn.
Just a small question.
Yeah.
So, often we talk about sustainability, like what is a sustainable food system? And what does it mean for all of our neighbors to have sustainable access to food? Like, how do we know that everyone has access to a grocery store, that they can feed themselves affordably? And often when we're talking about sustainability in food, we're really talking about those social and economic aspects and how we feed humans. And we often don't talk about the relationship that sustainability has to the natural world, to our ecosystems and the environment. We do in some ways, like we talk about big agriculture and how it degrades soil. But for me, sustainability in the food system is really about building a food system that, yes, feeds every single person the food that they want and need and that they deserve, that is a basic and inherent human right. But it's also a food system that cares for our natural systems. And so it cares for humans and it cares for non-humans, rivers, mountains, plains, flora and fauna, insects, wildlife. Like, I think that we have to think about those things together, because if we're only looking at feeding humans, we're actually going to deplete the resource that enables us to feed ourselves. And so for me, sustainability in the food system is really about bridging the gap between those relationships and understanding that sort of interdependence.
Ooh, there's that word, the interdependence. It's about sustaining all forms of life and their beautiful dance of interdependence. Haynes wrote me some beautiful words that before this podcast I had to pull both the computer out and the remarkable out because I've got her quotes here, and it's just so beautiful. She said, I discovered that food for me is how I live into my values of building different social, economic, environmental, and spiritual ways of being that resist business as usual. Hyper individualism, egocentrism, I said it right, correctly, and disconnection from the self, others, and the universe. Beautifully said. So how food drives sustainable futures. It's economic, social, economic, environmental, and spiritual. I want to touch on a couple. Let's start with the social aspect of food.
Yeah, so the social aspect for food, for me, is as simple as food brings us all together.
Yeah.
So in the world that we live in, it's so fast-paced. Like, we're all trying to survive, and there's a lot of pressure. And in the pressure, we've turned to a culture of convenience in how we feed ourselves and in how we even relate and socialize with one another.
Guilty.
Me too. I'm working on it. But food is an opportunity to really slow down and reconnect with each other. A great example comes, from the civil rights movement. In the height of that movement, food was a place where people came together to restore and reconnect and rest. In the movement towards a more just future, people would open their homes and cook meals and feed one another. And as I've learned about that throughout my life, I've thought, wow, this really is a tool for transformation. Like, how we feed ourselves and how we eat together is really an opportunity to foster shared understanding and relationships of trust with one another.
I've experienced that firsthand with Haynes at her house. It was beautiful. It was beautiful, literally. Oh, yeah. Well said. Loving each other, there's so many different expressions of that, and food is absolutely one of them. And when you touched on like the convenience and how the individualism, the hyper individualism, I'm guilty of that. I tend to eat while I'm standing up. I tend to eat quickly. I tend to not even really think about it. There was a period in my life where it was just I'm fueling myself with like macros, like protein. Working in the fitness industry, I was just concerned with what was going to fuel my workouts instead of the exchange and where the connection comes in. But the economic aspects of it, right? Growing your own food, being able to have more control over that and what you eat. Let's talk about that.
Yeah, so our food economy is really complicated, right? And the pervasive sort of agro-industrial complex, as we call it in the food system world, prioritizes like large-scale commodity agriculture, which is often quite degrading to our ecosystems, which connects to the next thing we'll talk about, the environmental. But in the get big and the get out, small-scale farmers and gardeners have been pushed out of growing food for their communities. It's hard to find markets. Food is subsidized. So people that are smaller scale have maybe 5 to 10 acres. They can't compete in the market. And so they decide to leave agriculture. And there's a growing movement of people coming back to the land to try and grow food for their communities in small scale regenerative. When we say regenerative, we mean it rebuilds the health of our ecosystems. So regenerative agriculture. And when we do that, we take back control over how we grow and consume food. So the predominant economic system in food limits variety, it limits choice, it limits our options for how we choose to feed ourselves, right? Like a lot of stuff is highly processed. We can only get 2 types of squash in the grocery store. And when we shift that to enable small-scale gardeners, farmers to make a living through more local and regional food systems, we basically take ourselves out of that economy that has exploited land, exploited migrant farm workers, and we create a pathway to a different future.
I'm really excited. Thank you for that. I'm really excited for one day when I can grow my own food.
Yeah.
Currently, I live in an apartment, like many people do in Nashville, and I haven't really spent a lot of time gardening. But what you do at the Nashville Food Project, I'm really excited to start doing this year. It's one of my goals is to volunteer with you guys at one of your community gardens and learn from people that have so much experience and knowledge. And then just that sharing aspect, that community aspect. And I think another way that I'm going to support those farmers is by investing in a CSA, which I know that you guys have one this May to August. Can you tell people what a CSA is?
Yeah, so a CSA stands for Community Supported Agriculture. And so it's a weekly delivery of veggies, fruits sometimes, that come from a local farmer. So you sign up for a whole season, and talking about the economics of farming, why it's good for farmers is because you pay at the beginning of the season. It gives them financing to pay for seeds, fertilizers, inputs that they need at the start of the season. And then you get a weekly delivery of amazing food every day. And quite frankly, the few times I've had a CSA, you're like, oh my God, how am I going to eat all these vegetables in a week? Like, it's a bounty, and it actually makes your dollar go further than buying at the grocery store. There's sort of this myth that vegetables from local farms are going to the farmer's market is more expensive. And I have found in my personal life that actually, that's not true. I don't spend any more on produce at the farmer's market or through a CSA than I would going to a grocery store. And the variety is just so much more incredible.
That's what I'm excited about, is like to try vegetables that I've never tried before. I'll go into Trader Joe's sometimes, which love Trader Joe's. They're affordable. I don't know where most of their stuff comes from, but I think it's good. But it's covered in plastic still. Oh man, that just breaks my heart. And I have anxiety going to the grocery store. We've talked about this. I just don't like going in there. I'm confused. It feels I'm disconnected, right? Like I feel like I've been tricked or something. And then I'm trying to buy food that's going to nourish me, which is mostly vegetables. And for me, that's what I want. I want that stuff directly from the earth. But the CSA is really cool, and I'm excited to do that. And you can actually, there's like programs where you can pay half up front and half later. There's also ways for you to give more if you have the means to do that, which plays directly into this whole thing of giving and receiving when it's due, like the earth or the universe, the source, love, God, all of those things come back to us. And, the CSA program is really cool. Might not be everywhere. So Google it. If you're listening to this and you live in Nashville, Google it in your city, in your town. If it's not available, how can you start one, right? If this speaks to you, this is what this podcast is about. If you're inspired and you wish that you had that and it's not available to you, maybe that is your calling to maybe start one. And if you need help, maybe I'll give you her information and she can help you. But that leads us to the environmental aspect of food. Being good stewards of the earth, right? Climate resilience, as they say. Let's talk about all of that. The environmental aspect.
Well, agriculture is, as we're learning, as we know, one of the biggest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions in the world. And so how we grow food matters. How we consume food matters. Like, I think most of us care about the future of this planet, even if that feels overwhelming. But if we understand the power of agriculture and the meaningful power of agriculture, if we can change the way that we grow, we can change the environmental outcomes that are ahead of us, which will then affect our social and economic systems too. So in the context of like how I think about environmental sustainability in food, the research has shown in the UK that small-scale gardens in people's front yards are some of the most biodiverse ecosystems in the country. Not farms that are 100 acres, small little allotments in people's front yards. And that's because people are planting all kinds of varieties. They're caring for the soil. They're using limited water. And so insects thrive, pollinators thrive, amphibians thrive. Like, I was in my garden last year and I was weeding some cucumbers and there was a little garter snake like perched on the cucumber trellis. I never see that anywhere but in my garden. And so I think when you can like get down into the micro and actually like put your hands in the dirt, you realize like how important how we grow food is. When people use more sustainable agricultural practices, it stores carbon in the soil.
Yeah, that's something I just learned. Yeah.
Yeah, so soil is a carbon sink. It helps with water conservation, which I'm sure your future guests will talk a little bit about.
Right,
So it's just an incredible tool for creating a different ecological and environmental future for all of us, for humanity and for the non-human world.
Which it seems so foreign, this idea of gardening in your front yard. Like, and I've seen on Instagram, I've seen on the internet, these different like lots, basically. It's like, this, we don't want this. And it's just sod. It's just grass. And then it's like, we want this. And there's this beautiful garden with a million different things in this little spot, right? You don't have to have a lot of land, but the soil is important, and learning about that. There's all these steps to it. And I'm sure I can link some sources and work with you on that for people to kind of learn more on their own. But it's just not something we're taught to see or think that's normal, when if you think back to when we were just like hunters and gatherers, I mean, it was just everywhere. We don't have lawns.
No.
We don't have clothes on. What are we doing with clothes on? You know what I mean? Like, we are a completely different human species than we were when we were just doing what was right for us and the symbiotic relationship of the earth. I love what you said about how it can be overwhelming, but we all care. We do. I know we do. What were you about to say? You're about to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to talk a little bit, something that you said made me think about this. I don't know what, but about also the loss of farmland and the way that like front yard gardens or small scale farms can really contribute to that. So just in Tennessee, like we lose almost 100,000 acres of farmland a year to development, most likely, or people realizing tying back to the social and the economic, like, I'm a small scale farmer. I can't make a living. I can't, build generational wealth for my family doing this because of big ag.
Right.
So I'm going to sell my family farm to developers. And especially in Nashville and the kind of rural area right around our city, that loss of agricultural land is really harmful to our chances of being climate resilient or, having that biodiversity that we need. And it's really exciting, actually. In Nashville, there's a growing movement to use, there's some energy around using public land for agriculture and figuring out how we protect green space. And so agriculture can also serve as like mitigate heat islands and cool our cities. And so I think agriculture in urban environments is like one of the coolest opportunities.
Feeding Tomorrow, that movie, a friend of ours helped create. Haynes was on a panel. We had a big premiere here in Nashville, and they had a lot of people up on the stage talking about incredible things that they're doing. More Earth Angels. And the coolest thing out of that movie was in the cities, they're doing rooftop gardens. Like on top of the buildings. They're finding ways. There's space to be used. It just takes an idea. It takes a person that's persistent and consistent and not going to let somebody tell them no. Yeah, tell me no, right? Tell me no 100 times.
Yeah.
I'm still going to do it.
That's business as usual, trying to keep business as usual. There's this idea of like a threshold guardian that comes out of Joanna Macy's work. And it's this idea that as we move towards a different future, we move towards agriculture everywhere in our cities and growing sustainably, that business as usual will try and keep the old, the status quo. And so people that tell you that you can't, we just got to ignore that and keep our eye on the vision for the more sustainable future. So
that moves into spiritual, right? Spiritual, perfect transition. Let them tell you no, because that's how the most beautiful things are born. When someone's inside, their passion, their intuition is telling them, no, this is what you're meant to do, to be. And it's not centered around money, and that's business as usual. Everything's centered around money. It's not. I do this podcast for free, like, because it brings me it brings so much. My heart is so full doing this podcast. I learned so much. I get to highlight beautiful people, and this spiritual concept, feeding people and connecting to them, it's that bigger essence. Like if you take all this other stuff and it's all very important, but this spiritual connection back to food is so beautiful. What do you want to say about the spiritual connection, since that's your last little round out point there that you sent me?
Yeah, I mean, for me, this is probably the most important thing that keeps me in food. It's the way that I connect to a sense of smallness and to a sense of being in relationship with everything else. So for me, spirituality is about recognizing how my life is in direct connection to, the lives of birds or trees or plants, and kind of being reminded that I'm a tiny blip in this universal story. And when you put your hands in the soil and you see a seed go to a seedling, go to a piece of broccoli that you eat, there's no way to ignore or not feel sort of your relationship with all of that. You're basically, we like to think that we're managing and we're controlling the outcomes, and gardening and farming has taught me that I'm actually not in control at all, and that there's this beautiful relationship of reciprocity that if I can lean into that, I can grow food, I guess, in collaboration with the natural world, which is really woo and wild. But for me, that's what it's about. And then I think the other kind of spiritual component of sustainability in food is about relationship with each other.
Yeah.
And, combating, to use sort of an aggressive word, but our sort of disconnection with one another, our disconnection from understanding where our food comes from and how we feed ourselves. And once we can get back to understanding that, we make different choices. We slow down and we sit down to eat. We invite friends over and we tell stories about food. And we want to do it all again in the next growing season because it gives us courage, and it makes us feel like we're making a difference for our lives and like the lives of everything else around us. So that's what it is for me.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's your story, and how who you are is really inspiring for me, because I am one of those people who could get intimidated and be just moving along in my fast-paced life, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I think that my journey, my pace, which is my own, it's a little bit slower in this area, and that's okay. That's all right. I'm making little changes as I go, and I'm interested. I'm thinking about it more. I'm aware more of just what kind of food am I eating? Where is it coming from? It has given me some anxiety in the grocery store, but again, I'm in a process of my own of just breathing through it and, doing my own meditation on it and knowing that the right things will come to me when they're supposed to. And you are a gift, my friend. and what you do is a gift, and how you relate that to people. I think one of the biggest parts of this, and we'll close with this topic, is food equally being dispersed to all? Is this idea of environmental justice? Because you're part of another organization, Feedback Nashville. Let's talk about that real quick, and how like the systems and how that all matters as well, how that plays into it.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely not. To answer your question of, is food equitably accessible to all, or is our food system equitable to everyone and all the different segments of our food system? So Feedback Nashville is about understanding the system of food. So when we talk about a food system, it's everything from seed to dump. So how we grow our food, to how we distribute it, to how we market and sell it, to how we waste it.
How we waste it, right?
Yeah, and trying to understand what are the inequities and injustices at all of those points, because they are, but it doesn't have to be that way. Right. And we can build a better, more just and sustainable food system. And so in Feedback Nashville, we're trying to build that vision for a more just and regenerative food future for our city, because the vision is what guides the action. We often jump to, we got to act. And we do. We need to be acting now, but having a North Star for a utopia of regeneration and feeding ourselves and justice in the food system, that helps guide us when we don't quite know how to act and energize us. So, I don't want to talk too much about what's not working, because that can lead us to despair. And, but I think there is a lot of energy in our city right now around recognizing and creating something different around, for example, BIPOC farmers and gardeners losing land.
Could you say what BIPOC is?
Black, Indigenous people of color. They lose land faster than anyone else. And there's a movement in our city for community gardens and urban ag to be spaces where people can access land again and grow their own food. There's a movement around, produce sharing. So figuring out how we take excess produce and get it to communities that need it through community-free fridges and stuff like that. And so it's about everyone working together and recognizing the little role that each of us has to play in this transition to a different future, because all of us matter. Even if we're like, we never think about food, we all eat. And so the choices that we make and the actions that we take, they do influence where we're going. So,
perfect. Perfect. Wow. Ooh, I feel good. We're acknowledging that there are some issues. We're acknowledging that we're on the right path. We're acknowledging that if we seek to love one another in the form of, whatever expression works for you, but food in this conversation, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing. I hope that whoever's watching and listening out there they're already buzzing, I hope you're buzzing with just ways or ideas or that things that you can do in your life that you already know. Maybe you already knew it, but you just needed to hear this to really push you into that place. So the NashvilleFoodProject.org, I think.
Yes, that's right.
Feedbacknashville.org. Those are two places I'd love for you to go and spend time, check it out, learn something, come volunteer with me. I'd love to meet you. Critical Root Zone podcast was made to connect or align people with my mission, which is in order to love the planet, we have to love each other, right? We got to do this thing with each other in the community. And then it starts with you. Once you recognize that your wholeness and your spirit, once that feels good, you can do anything. And you can spread that joy and you can spread that love and you can spread what you love, which in this case, Haynes loves the expression of food. And that's a beautiful thing. I got fed. I can't wait to get fed again at your house. I'm so excited.
Come on over.
I'm really excited to also introduce you to my next Earth Angel, Bobby Smith. And we also feed people at, what he does. I'm not going to give it away yet, but just to say, I already was thinking, I'm like, man, there's so many connections with this. And I'm looking at him right now in the audience. I'm looking at him right now. So I'm really excited for that. Please stay tuned. And of course, like, subscribe, comment, share, do all the things that we need to do to keep this thing rolling and going. And then from the bottom of my heart, thank you for being here. And until next time. Thank you for listening to Critical Root Zone. If you'd like to reach out, email us at criticalrootzone@gmail.com.